Hello. First of all, I want to thank you all for staying until the end. I never expected this many people to be here on Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. I have a lot of ground to cover, and I'm one who already speaks pretty quickly, so hopefully you won't hear shrieking from Virginia in the translation booth in the back. But if I'm going too fast, someone just yell out or wave your hands or something. And I will post all my slides. I've already given the slides to everyone here, but I'll post them online, so don't feel like you have to take down notes furiously. I'm very similar to you. I come from a similar background. I'm a designer. I'm actually a car designer by training, but that's not so different than any other kind of designer. And I didn't go into the industry because A, I didn't want to move to Detroit, Michigan, and B, at the time when I graduated design, automobile design was an incredibly, ridiculously siloed industry, and it just was the wrong way to design good cars. And then the 90s happened, and I was proven right. Instead, I went into information design, which at the time was all about print. So I did a lot of heavy information projects like directories and catalogs and things, and I really honed my visual communication skills that way. But I grew up in the interaction design industry, like many of you, and this was at the almost at the beginning of it. So I've worked on a lot of things you probably have never heard of, like eTech in-car navigator application interfaces and CD-ROMs, and I've done way, way too many websites. I'm kind of glad not to do a lot of those anymore. And then I moved on to writing lots of books, etc. And then that led me into first brand strategy and then corporate strategy, business strategy, for both large companies and for small companies, and especially startups, that were looking to design better experiences in order to have more successful companies. And so I really started learning business there, and then in 2006 I sort of accidentally went to business school, and that may be very different than many of you here in the audience. And I did it because I knew that business was the future of design in some way, and that sustainable business was the future of business, and so someone I knew challenged me to drink my own Kool-Aid for a change. And if you had asked me 10 years ago if I would have gone back to school at all, but that I would go back and get an MBA, I would have laughed at you. But I learned some really valuable lessons and some really interesting things, and that led me to now being a full-time academic running 3 MBA programs, trying to reinvent the business that we teach and the business that is done, because it's not the way it needs to be in order for design to be successful and for everyone in this room to successfully create things for other people. How many people here are designers? I know it's kind of, okay, great, that's what I expected. How many people are engineers? Okay, how many people are like marketing or business, something on the business side? Okay, I'm going to apologize to you in advance because I don't speak very highly of business people. And I'm not talking about you specifically, but business as a field, as an industry, has a lot of change that needs to happen. We'll say it that way. And that's some of what we're doing in our program. But we need new tools, and I'll talk about those in detail, in order for business to actually continue to be successful, and successful in the right ways, successful in the ways that serve people. So I'll probably make disparaging comments about how business is done. Take it with a grain of salt. It's, of course, a stereotype that represents an industry, but I'm not talking about individuals. At first, I want to tell you a little story, and that is about 2 years ago, 2.5 now, Facebook bought this company. Does anyone remember how much money they spent on it? $1.1 billion, right, exactly. And now, at the time, it seemed like a ridiculous sum of money, and then after WhatsApp, it looked like chump change, so it looks pretty reasonable now. But how did they calculate the value of $1.1 billion? And how would you calculate the value? For example, their book value, which is an accounting term, we know this after the fact, was about $86 million. And it was only $86 million because a group of investors put $50 million into it the week before it was sold. So without that, it would have been about 36, or probably would have spent $1 million in that week on server load alone. But it was about 36, in this case $86 million on the books. That means if you liquidated the company, that's what it was worth. So how did they come to the other $1.01 billion? What did that represent? Because it wasn't anywhere in the accounting of the company. It wasn't considered an asset. It didn't exist the day before the sale. And yet, after the sale, suddenly there's more than $1 billion there that weren't there before. And I contend that this was the value of the relationships that they had with their customers. It was worth $1.01 billion to Facebook to purchase this company for their relationships. And if you look at the two numbers, which one do you want to focus on? Do you care about the 86 million more, or do you care about the 1.01 billion more? Hopefully you want to focus on the $1 billion. Certainly the investors and the founders of the companies do. But I'm here to tell you that everything that business students and business people learn is to focus on the $86 million, and everything that they're taught and the tools that they use are about managing that value and creating that value, and few business people know how to build or manage the $1.01 billion. And that's what needs to change in business. This isn't just true of Facebook or app companies, other kinds of companies. It's not even just tech companies, but we see this when companies go public, and we see them when they get acquired, that the bulk of the value is essentially off the books, and it represents the value of relationships. But most people in business don't know how to create or manage relationships very well, which is why we get the business that we have today. So I'm really talking about relationships in this talk. And it's the difference between a perfectly good company with a decent business model and an exceptional company that can charge a premium for whatever products and services that they create. And in order to have a conversation about relationships, we have to confront a problem in business, and it affects us as designers, and that is that we don't use the word value very well, and we don't have a very good definition of it. Basically, there's a missing conversation about what business thinks value is. And business wants that $1.01 billion to be there, but everything that they do in terms of processes and tools focuses on the wrong kind. And so business is struggling with the kind of value that we as designers routinely identify and are in a position to help build, but often aren't given the chance to because we don't fit, the things that we do don't fit into the traditional models and tools of business. When most people hear the word value, they think money. Most business people only look at financial value because that's what they're taught to only look at. It's essentially all that they can track with their tools. Now, some of them, when you get into a conversation, will also talk about functional value. This does this for our customers, and that's why they give us money. But these are only the quantitative kinds of value. They're the easiest kind of value to build, manage, identify, and deliver. But companies know that there's more to it than this, and economists and business people know that there's more value than just functional and price value. That's the difference between the 86 million and the 1.01 billion. But they're struggling trying to figure out how do they calculate the rest of it. And so they come up with all sorts of wacky equations trying to account for that other $1 billion or whatever it is in their business. This is an equation for lifetime customer value. You don't have to write it down because it's wrong. But it represents the kind of attempts that business people are taking to try to understand what it is that we contribute to a great deal. In the branding world, they've been trying to calculate this as well. This is one of about 7 major equations for how to calculate brand value. But the problem with these is they're all still in quantitative terms. And fundamentally, what we're talking about is qualitative value. In my programs, my colleagues and I have found, and we teach, we describe 5 different kinds of value, at least 5. We've found 5, maybe there's a few more. And I imagine in this community, most of these aren't surprises to you at all. But when it comes time to make decisions in companies, only the bottom 2 are usually represented in the discussion about what to make, what kinds of products and services, how to market them, how to fund them, delivery, operations, etc. And that's a big problem for us. Because we know the top 3 kinds of value, we know how to get at this fairly well, and we're some of the only people in an organization or for our clients in a consultancy who can, and yet the most important part is left out of the conversation all the time. The first thing we need to understand about these kinds of values is that they only exist in the context of a relationship. And it doesn't matter if it's a personal relationship, like you and your friends and family, or a commercial relationship, you and your customers, your partners, etc. The same dynamic applies. And you don't have to necessarily, well, hopefully you don't have to pay your friends to be your friends. That's probably not a healthy friendship if it is, or God, it would be even worse if it was your family member. Even though that there's no money changing hands, The other four kinds of value are always changing hands between two people. That's what a relationship is. We're passing back and forth these 5 kinds of value. And it's no different for users and customers and audience members and the people who we design for. And we have to understand a couple things about this. Often, it's difficult for business people to remember that relationships value is bidirectional. It goes both ways. It's not just the focus of what people are going to pay you for. It's the what are we going to give them that makes it worth them paying this amount of money for our service or our product or our event, etc. So sometimes that's missing from the conversation. The other thing about this is that it's dynamic. It's always changing. This is really frustrating for business people because most business plans, they don't plan for change. They're really bad at change, in fact. We heard a little bit earlier today about some of the things that business people have to keep in mind in order to deal with change rather than writing it all down in a plan and forcing that plan into place no matter what happens. The other thing about value is it's emergent. It's not a thing in and of itself. It comes out of the relationship. In fact, it's the only place that value emerges is within the context of a relationship. And for companies, that's at the intersection of customer needs and what the intent of the company is, and that's supposed to determine what it is that they should be offering in the first place. It's a little hard to read there. I apologize. Okay, so this brings us back to relationships and why they're everything to a business and to a person if you're talking about your personal relationships. And our job as designers and engineers and other kinds of developers and creators is to help our peers see beyond the spreadsheets, and which do a terrible job, by the way, of measuring any of this value because they're essentially quantitative tools trying to describe mostly qualitative relationships. The only place a relationship exists is in the context of an experience. And this is why experience is so damn important to this community, but also to companies, our clients, our partners, because the experience is the only moment where the relationship is actually engaged. And you can think of a relationship as a series of experiences over time. And it doesn't matter if you're delivering a product or a service or an event or an environment, it's always an experience. And I'll talk about that a little more deeply in just a second. Just remember, value only emerges within the context of a relationship. Relationships only happen within the context of experiences. And so this is the system between business and users or customers, and it describes what we see every day and what we do every day. Doesn't matter if you're a company talking to a partner or a customer talking to a company or a person talking to a friend. It's the same system because it's about relationships. Doesn't matter if you're talking about civic innovation in government, for instance. It's still there. Doesn't matter if you're talking about NGOs or any kind of nonprofit. All 5 of these kinds of values are always existent. They're always there. Meaningful value, by the way, is probably the most difficult to define. We hear about it, we've heard it, just today I've heard probably 3 or 4 speakers talk about it. But it's the deepest kind of value, it's the most stable kind of value, and therefore we teach our students it's the best place to align your business strategy because it's at the point that changes the least. Sometimes people's worldviews do change, which means their core meanings change, but not very often. Almost everything else changes first. So our business peers need to understand that while they're busy focusing on function and financial value, we can help them uncover, discover, understand, and then build these qualitative kinds of value. So we have the quant value and the qual value. And this essentially describes the 2 worlds that we have to live in. We have to deal with quant stuff regularly, and we're often the only people in the organization, aside from maybe salespeople, that deal with the qual side. And that puts us in a really influential and a really critical position because we're sometimes the only people that understand the qual side. And I'll go back to that, $1.01 billion, the qual is almost always much, much bigger than the quant. And so we need to get that qual understanding of customers into the decision-making processes, because otherwise the company's making the wrong decisions. And how many people have ever heard, oh, people won't pay more for that. We can't afford to do that feature, function, product, service, whatever. It's really, really common. The next time you hear someone say, people don't pay more for things, look at the watch they're wearing, and they're probably wearing a watch. Look at the clothes that they're wearing. Look at the car that they drive, or ask them about the car that they drive. Chances are it's not Old Navy. It's not the cheapest, Chinese watch you can buy at a corner store. It's not a Kia or a Hyundai. Chances are even the people who claim that people don't pay more for things, aren't paying less for, essentially are paying more for things in their own lives, because this is how people work. This is just one of the myths that business people are taught, and it's pounded out of their heads that people are interesting, weird, inconsistent people, because they're given frameworks to understand that sort of normalize us to these myths that don't really exist. And this leads business people to miss the biggest part of value in the equation. They literally have a blind spot for this value, the vast majority of them, because they've been taught tools that essentially cancel it out. They will, qualitative is a weird word to use with business people. If you just call it premium value, they get it. And very often they'll say, oh, well, we're not a premium company. That company can charge a premium. We wish we could charge a premium like Apple, like Porsche, like Cartier, like whoever. But this is the way you become a premium company, is you pay attention to these qualitative values. In the business world, you call one book value, because it's accounted for in the accounting systems. The rest is called goodwill. And when a company goes public, or when a company gets acquired, suddenly there's this big balloon of value, and it's literally shoved into a cell or a line on the balance sheet, because it still has to balance out. It's shoved into a line called goodwill. Didn't exist, now it exists. We don't know what to do with it. Shove it in over here, because that makes the numbers work. That's how goodwill, this is how qualitative value is actually accounted for in companies. It's a problem because, again, I can't stress this enough. This is the value of relationships. This is what you point to when those quantitative optimizers in your client firms or your own company, and we all need quantitative optimizers for some of the decisions that we make. But when they claim that relationships or emotions or meaning aren't important, this is the slide you need to show them. Because it turns out it's the most important thing to businesses if they want premium value, if they want good relationships, if they want lifetime customer value. Now, if they only want to go for the cheapest thing and they don't care about getting that customer back again, yeah, well, okay, then those things don't matter. But for the vast majority of people in business, that is what they're after. So I contend that, and a really simple way to say this is, those companies or those people who focus on total value, the qual and the quant, create more of it more often. Or you could use the business word, premium value. I don't care what the language is that you end up using, it's still the same message. But it also reminds us, and this is often a surprise to a lot of people in business, even about their own business, that we're all in the relationship business. Doesn't matter what kind of business you do, you're in the relationship business, which makes relationships incredibly strategic. In fact, there's nothing more strategic than relationships in business, and that's on the internal side with partners and employees. It's on the external side with customers and competitors, et cetera. And the work we do can have probably the biggest effect on creating this kind of value, creating these kinds of relationships. It also means that experience is incredibly strategic. The better the experience, the better the relationship, and the better the value that emerges out of it. Some of you have probably seen this graph before. It comes from a famous argument, a famous book called The Experience Economy, and in it, Joe Pine and James Gilmore contend that as we move from a commodity-focused business to a product-focused business to a service-focused business to an experience-focused business, everything goes up. Your costs go up, but your value goes up. The more money you can charge, the higher the profit margin you can attain. Your customer loyalty often goes up. Everything gets better as you move to an experience business. And I have one problem with this. Anyone that's ever used a product or a service has had an experience. So it's not something at the end. Experience is across the whole thing. It's all experience. And Joe and James will probably say something like, well, yeah, that's all true, but for those companies that focus on product, they're not focusing on experience, so they can only reap so much benefit. And my answer to that is, yeah, they're making really crappy products. They're making crappy services. It's not that they're not in the experience business, it's just that they don't care about the experience, which means they don't care about the relationship, which means they're not really focused on the attaining the opportune value that's available. They're just making crappy products. By the way, if you say that to a company, they're probably not going to be very happy, but the examples that are used in the book are all essentially events or places, events and environments. We can't forget, and business people have read this book, and so a lot of them still don't get it, that it's all experience. It's just not a very good experience if you're not focused on it. And it means we need, to understand experiences better, and there's a whole system for experiences, and I don't have time to go into all of these, but there's a lot of elements in creating a good experience. And we, as designers and developers and engineers, we have to pay attention to all these pieces. They're all parts and places where we can differentiate what we're creating, but they're also parts that contribute immeasurably to that qualitative value. This is where the qualitative value lives. So to play this game really well and to play it deliberately as opposed to maybe accidentally or intuitively, which is sort of how we've played it for the centuries up until now, this is the challenge. We need better tools to understand total value, which is to say mostly the premium value or the qualitative value. That means we need to collect new and more information, and Steve just talked before the break a little bit about this. We need to look for those 5 kinds of values in the research that we do. We need to do things like uncover the core meanings that our customers have so we understand their worldview, because it's at this point that we understand how to build meaningful value for them. Meaning's been mentioned a couple times already here. We actually have a model for meaning. I can deconstruct meaning with you. I can go into a user interview and understand where they stand here in this palette of meanings, what they prioritize, and then with a little bit more research and some other tools, I can understand what triggers these meanings for them. In other words, how they express these meanings. Well, if I know this, I now have the basis for creating meaningful value. And I have the basis for aligning a meaning strategy with a business strategy. So now, at the business level, I can drive meaningful experiences all the way down to the offering and to the servicing, the delivery, etc. So we need to learn some new qualitative techniques. And Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's book was already referenced here. It's the first time I've ever heard it referenced in a speech. And it's a really good book, but it's a really old book too. There's not a lot of material out there on this. And we need to practice new techniques like laddering to get at this qualitative value. In our program, we don't only teach these, but we teach our students to build their own tools like these. These are meaning cards, because it's really hard for people to have qualitative conversations. You can't ask anyone what they want anyway, because you can't trust what they say back to you. So you're always getting at this research information, this data, sort of triangulating it, because I can't ask anyone what I really want to know from them. So talking about meaning, talking about emotions, talking about identity and values is really difficult for people. We're not used to it. And so when we're asking questions about these things, sometimes verbal answers are not the ones that give us the best data back. Sometimes visual answers are. So we teach our students to create these meaning cards, which are multiple photographs around the same core meanings. And this helps us, or helps them, understand this data from their customers better. Then what that does is it gives them insight into the kinds of triggers, which is to say design elements that trigger those core meanings. And so for each of these, for specific user populations or user segments, customer segments, they understand what it is that they can use to curate their design choices to trigger the very kind of experience that they want. And these aren't mood boards. I hate mood boards, by the way. Anytime I see a mood board, it's a sign that a designer doesn't really know their customer or their user very well, but they know themselves very well, because that's what these symbols mean to them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've uncovered what those symbols mean to their customers. This isn't about inspiration. It's about an understanding of the responses your customers have, or your users have, to potential decisions you'll need to make. And so this is about curation more than it is about your favorites as a designer or an engineer. And I posted some of the tools here. I'll come back to this URL a couple times. but we're trying to post as many of these tools out there as we can. We're open sourcing a lot of our curriculum. It just takes too much time, and we haven't done as much as we need to. So those are some of the tools that we need to do better research. We also need better tools to do design on the relationship side. And so you've probably all heard about journey maps. This is a typical journey map. And journey maps allow us to plot the touch points over time that describes the experience, the user's experience. But mostly these journey maps plot front-end and back-end functions, features. A few of them will notate some qualitative elements like emotions. And even when they are, though, there's usually no model underlying the emotion, so there's no connection about understanding what the emotion is and what to do about it. And this is because often the right kind of user research to uncover these qualitative elements hasn't even been done, so how could you possibly plot things that you hadn't researched and found out in the first place? But there's surely no value references to identity, references to meaning in the typical journey map. Journey maps tend to be very, like I said, front and back end feature oriented. In that sense, they're really more about the quantitative part of the experience, less about the qualitative part of the experience. Instead, in order to really understand experience, we have to talk about something called state of mind. And that's literally what's happening in your head or your customer's head at any given time, because that's where the experience ultimately happens. And state of mind is that thing that you're feeling or thinking at any given moment. And it's the result of a system of experience, of stimuli and response, most of which occurs consciously, some of which occurs unconsciously in any kind of experience, any kind of action. So there's 5 pieces, 5 elements of experience, of a state of mind. And in order to understand these responses that's what allows us to give design consideration to the experiences that, of course, create or change the state of mind in our users and our customers. And so a lot of design elements come into here, and design is very much, has always been an attempt at shaping stimuli or shaping responses to stimuli by creating certain kinds of stimuli and shaping them in specific ways. And that's why we call these triggers, because every design decision you make triggers a response in your user, your customer, your participant, your audience's state of mind. In order to do a good job designing those things, then you really have to understand what's being triggered. And that includes things like core meanings, for instance. So once you know this, once you have a better understanding of state of mind, you figure out that really what you're plotting on that journey map is state of mind. We can identify a person's state of mind if we know all this about them. And for any given customer segment, we can plot the emotional and meaningful value as it occurs throughout the experience. So we can do this first with the existing experience that they're having, the existing products or services that ourselves or our clients are offering. And we create essentially what's called a waveline, and this is a word that comes from music composition. And the waveline is a story of state of mind, which is to say it's a story of experience, which is to say it's a story of relationships. And once we know this, we can design a new story, and we can design an ideal story. And by designing the ideal story the same way a composer might design the emotional impact of a piece of music, or that a writer or a screenwriter designs a movie or a book or any other kind of story, we design a story of what it's like to live, experience the things that we design for other people, products, services, events, etc. But it's a story that's built from emotion and meaning. It's not a story built from functions and features. And that's the biggest difference between a waveline and a journey map. Essentially, the story has to come first. And we've seen people in practice take this on, and what they do is they plot out all of the touch points they already offer. Oh, we have products for this and events here, and then we send them an email here, and then they see this advertisement, and we're done. The problem is you can't plot the touch points and assume that they're having the effect that you want. You have to design the story and then figure out how to change the current story into the new story by designing new touch points, new products, new services, new events, and new spaces. And when you do that, you get something that's fairly sophisticated that can track the value and the opportunities to intervene in the story that's already being told and change it or transform it into a story you're hoping people have. And the story's never exactly ideal. It never ever reaches nobody ever has exactly the story that you want them to have, but that's okay. Not everyone has the same story when they go to a theme park like Disneyland, or they walk into the Apple store, or they go shopping in a great store. That's not the point. The point isn't to make sure everyone has exactly the same experience or that everyone has the ideal experience, because there's too many variables for you to take into account that you just can't control. The point is to design a great story and then do what you can to help people stay in that story. And if you're fortunate enough to have customer service people available or actual employees in the store or in the theme park, they can be trained and given responsibility and encouraged to help people on their story as it's unfolding. So when someone drops something, if there's a person there to help them pick it up or give them a new one, that helps them back onto the story that you hope they were going to have in the first place. It helps keep them on the wavelength. If there's no one there and it's just a server, it severely limits your ability to keep people on the wavelength, but it's still a possibility. So the difference between a journey map and a waveline is the difference between touch points and relationships. And we need new tools like this, and we're posting some of these tools. This is a 1.0, not super detailed version of what I just showed you, and it's only because we haven't gotten around to getting the 2.0 up. But these are the kinds of tools that we need to invent in our community in order to make the things that will have the impact we know that we can help our companies, our clients have if we're given the chance. Another tool, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, is the ability to align core meanings with customers in a really deep way, so that the things that our company truly values and believes in, if they match the things that our customers mostly value, most important to them, and believe in, then we have a really good platform for which to build meaningful experiences. If we don't have this kind of overlap between our customers and our companies or our teams, for that matter, it doesn't mean that we can't do anything. It doesn't mean we can't shoot for and design meaningful experiences to make meaningful relationships. What it does mean is that we're probably going to spend a lot more money and time than we would otherwise if we had a lot of overlap there. So all these tools are posted here at this URL, but I will say the caveat is they're not that good yet. They're not even as good as we're using in our program already, because we just haven't gotten around to posting better ones. Okay. Now we also have to not just build new tools for research and build new tools for design, we have to build new ways of communicating that to the rest of the organization, the rest of our clients and peers. Because we're the ones responsible for bridging this gap in understanding, because we can't rely on the business people or the other people, our other peers in our organizations to take the time to learn our language and come bridge it from their side. It would be ideal if they did. There's a lot of interest that they have in design in doing so, but it's still pretty much our responsibility for bridging this. One of the things that characterizes business people is that they're, especially in MBA, that comes out of a business program, is they're extremely confident about what they know, and they're very, very sure that what they know is true. Unfortunately, in my experience, that's not usually the case. Because again, they've been taught to forget about humanity and focus on the damn numbers. And that's not true anymore. It's only a sliver of what's going on in the system, in the very system that they're trying to create a lot of value in. There's a lot of myths of business. And I will be the first to say and agree that MBAs have pretty much ruined the world. And I can say that because I have an MBA now. At least I think that gives me a little bit of ability to say that. And it's not that MBAs are bad people, but they've been taught that way. They've been taught bad tools, or they've been taught good tools for part of the equation and taught that there's no other part of the equation. When you have economic models, anyone ever taken an economics class in here and learned neoclassical economics? Oh, just a few of you. Thank God, because you would be horrified to I'm going to nod here. Horrified to understand how economists view the world, because it is just bullshit. I cannot, but you know, you listen to neoclassical economics and the Chicago School of Economics, which has been around and driving economic theory for 70 years, and you get the world we have today, where the things we value most aren't in the equation, and markets are really good for optimizing things, but when you don't put the things that you care about into the market, they optimize out. And that's sort of why we live in a world that isn't super successful for us, that we have a lot of challenges or problems with. So we have to overcome a lot of what our business peers are damn confident about, because what they think is reality isn't reality. And this is our biggest challenge as designers and engineers and developers. This is the biggest bridge that we need to cross. I'll give you some some simple examples. Even the most basic terms that describe things are wrong, the wrong definitions, and they trigger the wrong actions. So marketing is always put with sales and advertising, and essentially they're used synonymously, but they're entirely different things. Marketing is the inhale. It's the way you learn from your customers, your markets, your industries, your competitors. It's what you take in about your understanding. Sales, advertising, PR, that's the exhale. That's what you tell people, right? And because everyone uses marketing to mean both, what we have is a lot of organizations that just exhale a lot, and they inhale very little, which probably starts to explain a lot, right? That's not healthy. Like, you can't just exhale in your life. If you don't inhale, you're not going to be a healthy organism. Yet most businesses, most organizations aren't inhaling well, so they can't be healthy. They can't create the kinds of things that they want to create. And guess what? We're really good at the inhale. We know how to talk to people. We know how to learn things from customers. We just had, 2 days of learning how to do this from different kinds of speakers. So we're positioned really well to help businesses understand that they're only doing half of the job. But good luck in trying to get them to understand that marketing is what they're supposed to be learning, and not marketing equals messaging, because that's how the word is mainly used in the business world. We use it in our world. I've heard it used this way on this stage today. Marketing is not messaging. That's the exhale. Marketing is the inhale. So this is one of the first things that you might figure out, the language. That language may not work perfectly in your organization, but figure out the language to communicate this concept to your peers and your clients, because it's really important. It opens up a space for the work that we do. And without that space opened up, why would we expect anyone to value it? This is really important in the design process, not just on the development side, but on the strategy side. Because when we advocate our involvement in high-level decision-making, then we can't really be surprised when we get a project brief that, the first thing you look at and read is thinking, this is not what we should be making. How many of you have been in that situation? You get the client brief, you get the project brief, and you shake your head thinking, this is a waste of time. This is the wrong thing. Well, it's too late, because on the strategic side, that decision to make that thing has already been made. It's really hard to go back at that point. That strategic side is all about deciding what it is that we're supposed to be in the business of doing in the first place. And when those decisions are made, and I kid you not, they're made with very, very little insight into who customers are, what their needs are, and the context that they live in. If at all, if there's any of that information at all, it's probably been done by market research, which 95% of you can just take and put right in the trash can when you're done, because it's been so terribly done. I could go into details about why most of the market research techniques are just not worth doing, not worth paying for, mostly because they only look at easy information that's easy to get quantitatively. They don't have they don't offer a qualitative understanding of customers. But again, that's right where we are. We're close to customers in terms of understanding them on a qualitative level. So we have the exact information that needs to be looked at when strategy is being set. And if we can get that information into strategy, then hopefully the decisions that get made end up in the right creative brief, the right project brief. And then it's the right thing, and then it's so much easier to execute on that and just make the best whatever it is, rather than dealing with the fact that it's not the thing we should be spending our time on in the first place. And this is a cyclical, continuous process like Jeff described earlier today. This brings us to a word that we need to confront as well, and that's the word strategy. And people use strategy very differently, and often it's used as sort of a stick to hit people over with. And you probably heard this, or maybe it's been said to you like, oh, that's very tactical. We're talking about strategy. This is the state of business. Strategy and tactics are confused all the time, which is fine, because strategy and tactics operate at different levels and multiple levels within an organization. All strategy is a high-level plan for action. Now, in practice, it's usually just a high-level plan, and then it's put on a shelf somewhere, or it's uploaded to a website, and nobody ever looks at it again. Well, that doesn't really do anyone any good. Strategy has to be driven down to all decisions. In my budget, in my program, I'm the only one that's ever done this, I'm sure. In my Excel spreadsheet that is my budget, I have all 5 of our strategic initiatives that are in our strategic plan for our school as columns in my budget. And every single one of my budget items maps to one or more of those. And if it doesn't map to any, guess what? That's a really good sign that maybe I shouldn't be spending money on that, because it's not furthering where we should go strategically. So strategy is something that's supposed to be acted on continuously, all the time, not just something that's done every 3 to 5 years and then put away somewhere. But I like this definition a lot because there's another definition I like a lot from Charles Eames that says design is a plan for action. And coincidentally, those things sound pretty similar. And that's a good thing for us as designers and developers, because it means we're already well prepared with the skills to create strategy, or at least to contribute to strategy. So if you look at the parallels between strategy and UX, usability is usually pretty tactical. It's about products and how to make the product as good as possible. Strategy is where we talk about experiences that we want to create, the relationships we want to have, and that's where sort of design strategy and design thinking come in. And it's not that the craft of design or usability is no longer important. It's really important. It's how we implement. But we have to separate the conversation. And if you're only able to have a conversation about usability or style in the design style kind of design, then you're not having the conversation that you need to have within an organization. Because if you're not talking about experiences and relationships and these kinds of value, you're always going to be relegated to delivering or implementing something that someone else has decided. These are some of the other things that are often strategic and tactical, again, not always 100%. And what this represents and boils down to is, conversations about the offerings or the product, and conversations about the organization itself and what it's trying to be. And the first way that you build context in strategy is to do stakeholder analysis. And this is, again, what we're really good at. We're really good at going out and talking to people about their lives, their needs, their desires, their emotions, their meanings, etc. So we're probably best positioned to do this kind of work, probably better positioned than most people in your clients or in your companies. So we also need to build better business tools, not just better design tools. And this is where we have sort of the biggest uphill climb. And we're seeing some development in that. This is the business model canvas, and you can download it at this URL. In fact, you can download the first 72 pages of this book. It's a really good approach to, in fact, it's a very designerly approach to creating a business model. And the parts in green, which sort of don't look so green there, those parts are literally all about design. They're about the front end. And they become the core of what a business model is. And that's the main revolution of this new tool. How many people have ever heard of a SWOT analysis? Few people? Oh, a fair amount of people. That's good. Well, I'm here to tell you that SWOT analyses are usually done really, really poorly, just like sort of everything else. SWOT stands for strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats, and the way that they're used, literally the way business students and business people are used, is to take this grid and just simply fill it in with the stuff that they think is appropriate. It's totally guesswork. It's incredibly lazy. You can put anything you want in there, and how do you know that those are the right things? Well, we as a community can figure out, if we do the research, we can figure out what those things are because we are the ones that understand customers on a qualitative level. We have to help our marketing brethren and sisters to do better environmental analysis, because that's where you figure out what the real issues are. And what comes out of environmental analysis when you do this are not questions about features and functions. They're questions about people's lives. They're questions about their fears and their hopes and their goals, and that's the stuff you need to put into competitive analysis. And once you compare yourselves against your competitors in this way, you get an entirely different kind of strengths and weaknesses. And then those determine, they're derived, your opportunities and threats are derived from those strengths and weaknesses. Then we can move on to something called positioning. And many of you have probably seen a positioning statement, and I kid you not, business students and business people are taught to fill this in the same way they do a SWOT analysis. They just make stuff up and put it in that they think is right, without research, without any qualification. It's like Mad Libs for business. It's no different. This stuff needs to be derived from research, which means you have to do the right kind of research in the first place, which is, again, where we come in, because we're the ones best suited to do the right kind of research to plug into this. And once you do the environmental analysis and the right kind of competitive analysis, now you can figure out the best position that represents the best opportunities for your company. That's us. We need to be a part of business strategy. So, I'm almost out of time. I'm going to summarize. Break it down really simply for you. Value is more than financial. You probably already knew that, but now you can point to someone and say, well, it is because he said it is. You know, if you didn't feel confident in saying it yourself, I'll say it for you. Everyone is in the relationship business. That goes for your personal life as well as your professional life. Don't let anyone tell you they're not in the relationship business, that they don't have their eye on the ball, which means everyone's in the experience business. If you have a client that says, oh, we're not an experience company, we're a product company, or we're a service company, either run screaming or charge them triple. Because there's going to be a lot of work, because they don't realize something fundamental about their own damn company. You can help them discover that. They'll like you a lot for it. Hopefully they'll pay you a lot for it. But this is one of the points of the conversation where you really understand what they understand and what they're prepared for. We have to bridge the divide between the qualitative and the quantitative. And it's really not a versus, it's an and. Both are important. And designers are often pretty guilty of ignoring the quantitative, because we don't want, damn server logs to tell us what the decision should be on the color or the placement or the kind of button or whatever. But quantitative analysis is really important because it helps give us insight. Quantitative data never makes the decision, but it's a really good source of information we should be using in making the decisions that we do. So it's qual and quant. But it's an uphill battle with a lot of traditional business people who only think quant is important. And of course, we need new tools for not just research, not just design, but we have to go redesign the business people's tools as well. With that, I'll leave you. I'm the only thing that's been standing between you and partying and drinking, and so you're minutes away from celebrating. So thank you very much.